Right, back in the KMUN studios with John Hardin here. This is Nick, and this has been The Niche. And John's in town, touring musician from Northern California. And if you've been listening to the show so far, you've been hearing some of John's electric didgeridoo sounds. Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, Nick. It's been really fun playing in the niche this evening, and I'll do one more for you right now.
Oh, before
yeah.
before
Okay.
we start, can I ask you about your? Maybe I'll ask you after your song, but I want to know about your film.
Oh, we could take a minute and talk about that, and I'll play like one more at the end.
Okay.
But I'd love to talk about this film. Uh, I've been working on this film for almost 3 years now with my friend Miles Moscato, who did all the cinematography and shot the film. I wrote it, and I'm here from Humboldt County, California, and Humboldt County was kind of ground zero in the war on drugs. Back when they were really keen on eradicating marijuana. And we also have down in Garberville, a tiny little town in the southern part of Humboldt County, the first licensed hemp business in America since marijuana prohibition began in 1937. It was there was no good reason to outlaw marijuana. It was sold to us as like a public health, that we were doing something to stop people from becoming depraved maniacs when they got high on marijuana, right? When nobody knew what marijuana was, they were able to convince people of this. But what they were covering up was the fact that cannabis, hemp, was a agricultural staple that had many, many uses that ranged from making paper and plastics to making rope and fabric and cloth. It was one of the most popular medicines at the time. It was something that had a lot of uses that a lot of people wouldn't have really thought about, but made a big difference in regards to industrial production output. And some very powerful industrialists were keen on keeping that plant off the market. And instead, DuPont wanted to market their nylon. William Randolph Hearst, who ran most of the newspapers at the time, wanted to liquidate all the forests in the Pacific Northwest. And John D. Rockefeller had designs on the pharmaceutical industry. And through marijuana prohibition, those corporations were able to seize control over our economy and increasingly over our lives. And they did this using psychological warfare strategies that were developed originally during World War I by, among others, a guy named Edward Bernays, who's known as the father of public relations. World War I was a awful, tragic bloodbath. And what Bernays found, and this quote is in the movie, is that ideas are weapons, and they are more powerful than bullets. And that in order to get what you wanted accomplished, you needed the consent of the public. And he worked out psychological strategies for engineering the consent of the public. And the war on drugs was an example of how they used psychological warfare to get the American people to consent to a war against them, and especially against their children. So the movie is called Hemp Disconnected, a psychological war for American independence, which is about this psychological war, how there was massive amounts of propaganda aimed at children and massive amounts of law enforcement aimed at youth. In order to keep an agricultural product off the market, that had many, many uses. It really crippled the American people and gave organized crime millions and millions of dollars. It was a dramatic, it was a big deal, okay? It was a real war against the American people that had really dramatic consequences. And in a few years, from like 1989 to 95, a few people put all the information about hemp, how it was that the canvas sails that were used by sailors to bring ships over to the United States in the 2 centuries ago, and that the canvas covered wagons that moved settlers west, all these things were made out of cannabis hemp, that they were made out of canvas, and that you could make paper and cloth and food, and that it was good medicine, that all this information came out because of the work of a few dedicated people who overcame really a lot of government oppression and violence and threats and intimidation to inform the rest of the country about this great product, about this truth. And Marie Mills, who owned the Hemp Connection in Garberville, California, was one of the very first people to start making started making clothing out of hemp cloth and selling it around the country. And hemp became very popular as soon as it was available, and it became her business became a success story, and soon became the most recognizable business in our town. It had the storefront right downtown with the biggest sign in the area. And that kind of changed the narrative in the war on drugs. The war on drugs really lost its momentum in the late 90s because all this information came out, both the information about hemp and the crime of marijuana prohibition, but also some good reporting led to the information about how the CIA was flying cocaine into America's inner cities and creating the whole crack epidemic, which was killing people all over the country. Getting this information out to the rest of the country really was the death knell for the war on drugs. And the laws are still in place. It has a lot of inertia, but you used to be able to get elected as a drug warrior. And I don't think anybody could get elected now on a platform of drug eradication. But this model of using psychological warfare to engineer consent for something that we would not have ordinarily gone for if we weren't really manipulated with this propaganda. So that's what this movie is about.
Very cool.
in not in a nutshell at all, but so I hope you'll check it out. It's called Hemp Disconnected: A Psychological War for American Dependence. It is available streaming now at our website, which is Hotbox. Yeah, let me get this right. Hotboxfilms.com. Hotboxfilms.com. But we're also working on screenings, to put together theatrical screenings because it's a brand new movie.
So, we've been talking, maybe you might want to come screen the film in Astoria possibly this fall.
It would be great to show it in Astoria. I know this area is a part of that history. You're very close to the timber industry. I'm sure cannabis is popular around here, and I'm sure that people have endured the effects of the war on drugs. I mean, in the same way that the Vietnam War affected a whole generation of people, war in many ways defines the lives of the people who lived through it, and the war on drugs really did that for people who grew up in the 80s and the 90s It was a huge part of people's lives, and we all lost people. We all knew people who went to jail and had their lives ruined and got kicked out of school, had lost their jobs or were denied jobs. This was a real serious. It was a real, and people had their kids taken away.
Yeah.
It was, and the American people put up with it for a really long time, and it took a tremendous effort to change that policy, and and this is kind of what it takes to overcome psychological warfare. It's something that we've never really dealt with.
Right.
And apparently it is something that we're going to have to deal with culturally now and into the future.
Yeah, it's hard enough to change our own minds, but then to understand what's all getting thrown at us in the mix is just like it's an uphill battle for sure for most.
It's really true. They use our good nature against us. We're used to talking to real people in real time where you can look them in the eye and you're talking to a real person, and a real person who knows that you're going to build a trusting relationship if you deal with them honestly. And so your motivation is to deal with people honestly, and you kind of expect to be dealt with honestly when you're dealing with a real person. It's human nature. And the people who devise this propaganda know how to use that against you. You have these disembodied voices where actors are pretending to be people with authority, and people who can lie through their teeth into the camera and convince you that they're telling the truth. And there are so many different strategies for using your emotional responses to override your rational thinking. And it's been going on in so many different ways, and the technology for it just gets more and more sophisticated. So it's impossible to shield yourself. It's like, I was hearing these words today. I'm being brainwashed and don't know how to stop it, but there's something in the chorus burns a hole in my pocket, and I can't feel the pain when my finger's in the socket, and only the numb survive. It's a real head trip out there, and as people, we need to connect with each other as real human beings, and we need to learn to be very suspicious of anything we see on a screen or that comes to us from these disembodied propaganda sources.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a amazing resource here at KMUN, and that we got a lot of local voices talking to their audience as if they're one and one in the room, and we don't do any commercial ads. We just run some underwriters for some small businesses around here in the area, and for the most part, no one can really tell us what to say.
This is so awesome, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to play here at KMUN. Is this a community radio station? Is that how we do it? It's not a college radio station. This is a community radio. Community radio is so important to keeping communities informed. You're really lucky to have this resource, and you should support it in every way you can, because these things are rare, and we need to keep them in local hands.
Absolutely, yeah. So keep an eye out for that film. Maybe we'll get something scheduled, and what's the name of it? One more time.
One more time. It's Hemp Disconnected: A Psychological War for American Dependence. Hemp Disconnected. That's the important part to remember.
Awesome. And
all right,
John Hardin in the studio here, and we're gonna bring it back to the musical communications, and then and we're just so happy to have you in the studio. It's just awesome.
Thank you so much, Nick. It's an honor and a pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity to play for you tonight.
Yeah. All right. Take it
All right.
away.